Pretty direct, pretty straightforward, kind of hard to misunderstand it. If you would, verse 29 of Matthew 24. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. So let's understand something happens after the tribulation. And so it's not before. You're not going to it's being raptured away before the tribulation. It's after the tribulation something takes place. And he says here, the days, the sun will be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and the Son of Man shall appear, and then rather shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. So Messiah shows up in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. Now, brethren, this is when he's coming back to be the King of the earth. He's coming back to be the one that is going to rule the earth. Okay? And we see here in verse 31, and he shall send his angel with a great sound of a trumpet. So somebody comes with him. So we're going to see who that is. And his angels will sound his trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So remember, the first fruit have already been raptured away. They've been taken away in the resurrection before the end of the tribulation. They've been taken to heaven. And so when he comes back as King of Kings, he tells the angels to gather the other firstborn sons. And so we read in Revelation 19, he comes back with those. But here, they're coming back to the earth, and we'll see more of what they do as we go on. Let's go to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. Satan is cast down to the earth. Yes, sir.
When I read that gathered from heaven, one end of heaven to the other, I think that's talking about the sky above the earth, the heavens, and they've been gathered from places on the earth there. In other words, you call the sky heaven, and the four winds he's talking about, and I'm wondering if that's what it means.
Well, based on other passages, Dwayne, and can't be concrete about the heaven word and one end of heaven to the other, but it's in from the other story. Well, the story as it all fits, it is the elect, or those that have the first fruit that have already been taken to heaven at this point, and he gathers them. Whatever out there doing, whatever God has them doing, and Revelation 19 tells us a little bit of this story, and he says, okay, let's go. And so they're coming back to the earth, and the first fruit are coming back with him. So he's gathering them from wherever they're at, whatever job the Lord has them doing, keeping in mind that he's coming back to be the king, and they come with him. Now that's the story that I think the Bible clearly is saying, but you got to put all these verses together, because when you take one verse, it sometimes can be used to apply to almost anybody. I mean, we've had it before where the first fruit, the church, the bride, everybody was the same. But I don't think the scriptures tell us that. And so let me continue on. If I can, we'll get to hopefully the most of this study here today. If you would, notice chapter 12, and something takes place. And in verse 13, he sees that he's cast down to the earth. And so he's not real happy about it. And so he goes to make war with the woman. And the woman here that he's making war with is the church. And it's for 3.5 years, for a time and a time and a half a time, for 3.5 years. So this is during the tribulation, and he's going to try to create havoc for the church. But notice it says here, the earth helped the woman. Now that we'll get to when we get to the story that I want to share with you in Matthew 25, and we'll bring up Rahab again, and you'll see that those who help God's people, God helps. And so we'll see that. But he says here, since he can't get the church, he goes after the remnant of the woman, which is the Jewish people. And so he goes after them. But Satan's cast down to the earth. So what's the catalyst that is making Satan be cast down? And I firmly believe it's the resurrection of the first fruit. It is the first fruit, the 1 Corinthians 15 resurrection. They have been resurrected to heaven. So all of the brothers of Jesus Christ, all the righteous sons, firstborn sons of God, are now in heaven, and Satan is cast down to the earth. So it says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth. And so I believe this is the point that we are seeing here, because there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new authority that's going to be ruling the earth. And Messiah is now in heaven with his firstborn brothers, with the priests of God. During this tribulation, Jesus protects his bride. Yes, ma'am.
What did you say caused Satan to be cast down?
I think it's the war in heaven over here in verse 7. I believe it's when the Messiah takes the first fruit to heaven. And you'll see in verse 10, he's the accuser of the brethren night and day, and he's been cast down. And you've got those that overcame by the blood of the Lamb. They love not their lives unto death. You've got all of these people that are actually being resurrected, that are in that first resurrection, and being brought to heaven as the first fruit, the Melchizedek priest. And I believe that's the point that Michael says, okay, you're out of here. And so Michael is the one that throws Satan back to the earth. And then he says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth. So what does he do? He goes after the church. But the church, Jesus said, nobody's getting my church. So they are sealed, or they're taken out on the wings of an eagle. What does that mean? We'll need to have to look at that. And then he goes after the Jewish people. That's when he goes to the land and starts killing those who will not take the mark of the beast. And that's what we will look at as we go on here today. But during the tribulation, Jesus protects his bride. Does God use people, or is it somehow supernatural? So when he says he's going to protect them on the wings of an eagle, okay, then you see here that he helps them with the flood comes and swallows up this group. So the question I have is, this protection that Jesus gives them, is it supernatural, or is it using people? And I want you to think about Rahab as we go into this aspect. Just as God used Rahab to protect the spies, God will once again use people to protect his church. And we'll see it. Go to Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25. Notice, if you would, verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory. So this takes us back to the coming, when Messiah's coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we read about it in Matthew 24. Remember when it says immediately after the tribulation, the preceding chapter, the Son of Man comes in from heaven. Okay, now let's go to chapter 25, and let's look at the same story. This is what's taking place. The Son of Man shall come in his glory. So he's coming back as King of kings and Lord of lords, and who's coming with him? The first fruit, the priesthood. They've already been with him. They already were taken away. And so they're coming back with him, and all the holy angels with him, and they shall sit upon the throne of his glory. And verse 32, and before him shall he gather all nations. Now, wow, you talk about a judgment day. There's a lot of people here. And let's wait and see how God judges. And he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. So all nations are going to be judged in this manner. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, the goats on the left. And then the king shall say unto them on the right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, does it tell us anything about what it takes to be called righteous? Not yet, but it will. Now, we know the first fruit are righteous because they keep God's commandments. Right? Yes. The first fruit, the Melchizedek priests, are led into all truth. They know God the Father. Whereas the church, the second-born sons of God, they don't keep all the commandments. They even teach others not to keep some of them. And they don't know God very much, but they sure know Jesus. Right? You guys follow me? So you have the church is that second group. Now Messiah is coming back, and he's going to take all the nations. And let's see what he does to the nations, and what was it that they did that made them righteous. Let's go on. Verse 35. For I was hungry, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, you came unto me. I want you to be thinking about the church that's protected on the wings of the eagle for 3.5 years. Notice here, Jesus is saying, I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's showing that these guys are doing good works.
They're doing good works to a certain group of people. And the certain group of people is the people we know as the church. That's the point I'm going to get to here as you see on. He says here, naked and you clothed me. Remember what he's talking about. He's talking about his people. He's talking, you'll see it in a minute. He says, naked and you clothed me. And he said, I was in prison. Does that mean that some of the church may end up in prison? Absolutely. Does that mean Jesus took you out on the wings of the eagle and protected you? Yes. He can protect you in prison. He can protect you anywhere. That don't mean you're not going to have hardship. It just means you're not going to be killed. Notice he says, then shall the righteous answer him. These people are going to say, what do you do? What are you talking about? When do we see you hungry? When do we see you thirsty? When would he give you drink? When do we see you be a stranger or naked or clothed you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and came unto you? And the king shall answer and say unto them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, you've done it unto me. Now remember who the least ones were? Remember Matthew 5:19, we started today. Those who don't keep the commandments and teach others not to keep the commandments are what? Least in the kingdom of heaven. He's referring to the church. He's referring to the bride of Christ. They don't. Do they keep the commandments of God, brethren? They don't know the first commandment. They don't know the fourth commandment. Right? So we understand here that the least of these, my brethren, if you do it to these, you've done it to me. So what we see here is these people who are good to the church help those out in need. Guys, you remember World War II and the Nazis and the Jews and how that there's been movies made about it to where some of the Jews were spared because there was someone that wanted to help them, wanted to take care of them, wanted to be with, to give them life. Now what God is saying, if you protect my people, you protect my church, guess what? You're going to be a Rahab to me.
You're a friend.
You're our friend. Thank you, brother. You're going to be a Rahab to me. I hope you're getting what I'm saying. Verse 41. Then shall he say to them on the left hand, that these who did not do good things to the church, those that were protected for a time and a half a time, for a 3.5 year tribulation. Now remember, he comes here at the end of the tribulation. It's when this judgment takes place. So the last 3.5 years, you've either done good for the church or you've done evil. And he says here, take those on my left hand and depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire. So you're going to burn them up right there. Then let's continue on. Then I was hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. I was naked, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you visited me not. Then they shall answer him, Lord, when did we do these things? Then he shall answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you did it not to the least of these my brethren, you did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So brethren, what made these nations? These are nations. It's not 10 people. It's the nations of the world, because the Christian church is all over the globe. And Jesus said, I'm going to protect them on the wings of an eagle. So he's going to have people just like Rahab to look after his church and his people all over the globe. And those who, just like those people in Nazi Germany who saved 10 Jews or 50 Jews or 100 Jews, just like we see here, if you've done it to the least of these, my brethren. Now, these are not the first fruit. These are not the priesthood. These are not the ones that we know are they'll be the ones going to be resurrected and will not go through the tribulation. These are the church, the bride of Christ, and they will go through this period of time like none other in the history of the world. Brethren, this group have watched over and they've protected and they've helped the church. And God says, that's good enough for me. Yes, sir.
Wait a minute, are you saying that because a few people helped out God's people, that nation is spared?
No. Individually.
No.
Every person. In other words, let's take, for instance, the Christians are rounded up and they're somehow or another going to be criticized where they can't buy or sell or trade because they won't deal, they won't play games with the mark of the beast. And someone says, but I've got food. I've got, come to me. I'll take care of you. I will feed you. I will help you. You're in prison, I will come see you. It's people that identify either with helping God's church or not helping them. Those who don't help are considered unrighteous, and they're thrown into hell at the end. Those who are willing to help, but how good did they keep the holy days? Not at all. How good did they keep any of God's Sabbaths or any of the commandments? Probably not much at all. What they did is they recognized those that did. Go back to Rahab. Yes, sir.
Okay, when this is something they did, things they did in the past, and they're being told about it now. The ones who did evil and the ones who did good. After the 1,000 years when the rest of the dead come up, there'll be one resurrection to life and one to dead. And those who did so bad that they had their names taken out of the book of life, there'll be those in that group that gets burned up. And the ones that their name is still in the book of life, they'll be led into life by the judge. Anyway, it's the same thing that you're saying. I'm just thinking this will happen also, whether this is in the tribulation or after the resurrection of the rest of the dead.
Well, there's eternal fire, or hell actually comes about twice. Okay? So we understand. The first is when Messiah comes back to be the king of the earth. He's going to take all the rebellious, all those who hate him, all those who fight him at Armageddon, all those the nations that will do not protect and look after his sheep, and they're thrown into hell. They're done away with at that point. They are gone. Everlasting hell says clearly they're thrown into hell and they're burned up. Those people are not going to live again. But then we see those people, their names were blotted out of the book. Obviously, where they're thrown into hell. And then we see the white throne judgment, when God raises everyone and they're going to be judged according to their works. Then the hell is reopened, and those not found in the book, as Dwayne was saying, they've been blotted out somewhere along their lifetime. Then they are no longer in the book of life. They are thrown into hell. And so we have Christ using hell twice, from what I can see in the Bible, to destroy the wicked. So what do the nations do? How do they protect, or how do they help the church during this tribulation? I think will be solely how they will be rewarded by the King as the eternal life for those who help the church, and we know eternal death or fire for those who haven't. Immediately after the tribulation, Christ used the angels to gather all the firstborn from one end of heaven to the other, as it says, as we've already read, bringing back judgment to the earth. Now, let me mention to you, Dwayne referred to this verse earlier, but in Revelation 7, there's an innumerable multitude that comes out of the tribulation. It says it's such a large number, I can't even count them all. Now, who is this large, innumerable number? And I've got two possibilities to give to you. The first is the church. The large number, it's the church that's protected through the 3.5-year time period. But God uses people to protect them. Right? Just like he used Rahab to protect the spies. God uses people. So could it be the church comes out of this 3.5-year tribulation? Or is it the nations, the sheep of the nations that protected the church? That said, no, you were hungry and I fed you. You were in prison and I visited you. You had all these things that the government of this country, of this world, is trying to force down upon you, and we were there to watch your back, so to speak. I don't know which one it is, but I do believe it's one of them. The innumerable multitude, I believe, is either the Christian church or it's this group we will call the sheep of the nations that he says that protects the church and gives to the church. But again, I'm not sure which it may be. Now, this time period when Christ comes to judge the earth, it says no man knows the day or the hour, the time period. I know many times we read that, we think it's referring to when he comes back to get the saints. Or he comes back to get the firstborn sons. That's not the time setting of that passage. That passage is referring to when he comes back to be the king of the earth. No one knows. Let's go to Matthew, or rather Revelation 19. Revelation chapter 19. In verse 11, Revelation 19 in verse 11. And we know Messiah is coming back, and we see who here comes with him. And he says, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he does judge and make war. Now we know that the Battle of Armageddon, he's coming back for that battle. He's coming back to save Israel so that it can't be said that no flesh will be left alive. In his eyes were a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven, now there I propose to you, that is the elect that was gathered from one end of heaven to the other. Those first fruit that have been taken to heaven, they were raptured in Revelation 11. Won't have time today to go and read there, but go back to Revelation 11 about verse 15 and read about the next 5 or 6 verses there, and that's when he comes and takes them to heaven. But anyway, they follow him with white horses, clothed with fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, and it should smite the nations. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he shall tread down the winepress of the fierceness and the wrath of Almighty God. So we know that he comes, and the two will be in the field. It says one will be taken and one will be left. You know, they had an entire series of Left Behind series. And we always said we don't want to be the one left behind. In this case, you do. Yes, sir.
These armies in heaven, clothed in white linen, who followed him on white horses. Armies in heaven is the same as the host of heaven. I think these could be the angels that are coming down with him.
Well, it may be, Dwayne, if that's the same word.
I'm not saying for sure.
Well, they do come with him, so
They'll be there too if they're all there. That's fine.
they certainly do come with him, and you may be right on that. I've not looked at that word. But we do know that when he comes, there'll be some that have, we'll think about the Left Behind series, and you didn't want to be left behind. But when he comes and takes them, who does he take first? The what? The tares. Yeah. Let's go to Matthew 13 and let's go and just read it. He takes the tares first and he puts them in the fire. So you don't want to be taken out first because you're going to be burned up. And then the rest of those will actually go in to his kingdom. If you would look at Matthew 13 and verse 35, talks about this is being kept secret from the foundation of the world. And he goes on to describe what they are, the tares of the field. Verse 38, the field is the world, the good seed of the shepherd are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. And the enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be at the end of this world. Okay, so at the end of this age, end of this world, when Christ comes to be the king, we saw there when the nations, that some of the nations are going to help protect and do good for the church, and some are not. And those that are not, it says, going to be thrown into fire. And it says here, verse 41, the Son of Man shall send forth these angels, and they shall gather out of the kingdom all the things that offend, and them that do iniquity. So he gathers out of the kingdom the evil, the wicked one, and he shall cast them into the furnace of fire, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun, the kingdom, in the kingdom of their Father. Who has ears to hear, let him hear. Yes, sir.
So it's, just a quick comment, it says the angels that do all the reaping in these verses.
Yes.
That's the part of the army that comes down
Well, the angels are doing the reaping. There's another verse somewhere, Dwayne, I don't know exactly where it's at the moment, where
I'm not saying you're wrong.
where the first fruit actually come with the Messiah, but
I remember seeing that too.
but either way, that particular verse there, I've not looked to see the Greek to know for certain. Okay, there's 47. This is the verse that Brother Jim Harding commented on one of our studies out at the pavilion. And he says, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered every kind, which it was full. They drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into the vessels, but cast the bad away. So it shall be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from the just. So he takes the wicked out first. Because, if you harvest them, now that all be hurt. But he waits till the end of the age, and then he takes the wicked out and throws them into hell. So, brethren, Jesus is coming back to the earth to fight the battle of Armageddon. Satan and his people have started a vicious attack upon Israel. And we know that the remnant there in Revelation chapter 12, they go after them to make war with them because they already have told us they want to make them extinct. They want to kill them, everyone. And so we know that Satan is very, very angry. Revelation 13 is the story of the Antichrist and what he does to the nation of Israel. And I believe this is a revival of the Ottoman Turk Empire. I believe it is the Islamic hordes, the 10 nations that will come up against Israel to bring all of this about. And of course we know that will end as the Battle of Armageddon when Messiah comes, and it says the sword comes out of his mouth, a two-edged sword, and the blood is going to flow to the horse's bridle.
That's a lot of blood.
That's a lot of blood. And rather the church, the bride, and the nations, based upon how they have treated God's people, will be judged according to their works. Their works. If you would go to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, and let's see that very statement. Notice, if you would, verse 27. The Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels. Then he shall reward every man according to his works. So when Messiah comes with the angels to judge the earth, that's not when he comes and gets the first fruit. That's not the resurrection you read of in 1 Corinthians 15 in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye at the last trump. That's not a Revelation 11:15 when he comes at the seventh trump. That's when he comes and gets the first fruit, the priesthood, the ones that are going to rule with Jesus for 1,000 years. But when he comes back as the king and he judges the earth, he says every man will be judged according to their works. And those who offend, those who are the evil, the wicked ones, those who did not help the Christian church and give them support in their time of tribulation, then it says they're going to be thrown into hell, into the hell that was prepared for Satan and his angels. So we know the great supper is going to take place. The birds are going to eat of the flesh of all those that fought against Christ there at Mount Zion in that final battle. So, brethren, we need to realize that Jesus is the judge of the earth. And so, as I've mentioned in this study here, briefly, though in part, there is the first fruit, the firstborn sons of God, the Melchizedek priest, and Christ is coming for them. And they will be like him, and they will know the truth. They will know the Father, and they'll be like Jesus when he comes. And then there's another group, other sheep, Jesus says, that's been given to him by the Father. And he said, I'm not losing any of them either. And Jesus says he's going to protect them on the wings of the eagle for time and a half a time. But does that mean that it's going to be supernatural? No. It does not. Just like God used the harlot, and the harlot, by helping those spies, ended up in the faith chapter of Hebrews chapter 11. I believe the same we see in Matthew 25. The nations that help the Christians during this time of trouble are going to be called righteous, and they're going to be invited into the kingdom of God. It's pretty amazing, folks. Pretty amazing. God's will is that how many be saved? That all be saved. God is love. So God is making a way where people don't have to do everything to be saved. Even the church that doesn't keep the commandments and even teach others not to keep them. They're in the kingdom, though they are least. In other words, they're not the first fruit. They are the second-born children. But when it comes time to have a Thanksgiving meal, guess what? You're all at the same table. God is no respecter of persons. Isn't that awesome? God bless you in your endeavors and your seeking of him. And I love you guys. I'm glad to be back. And hopefully God will allow me to be here many more days. Thank you guys.